All right. Emma, it's 7:05. Do you think we should just go for it?
Yeah, I'd say let's go for it. I will always be checking the chat, so drop them in the chat as long as Krystal is talking, and I can feed them to her as we go along.
Yeah, Emma will interrupt me, so you guys can just write any question that you have. And just as a quick reintroduction for anyone who just joined, my name is Krystal. I'm the founder and CEO of Grouphug Solar. I have with me Emma. Emma, do you want to give a quick reintroduction?
Hi, I'm Emma. I'm the outreach coordinator for Grouphug.
And we put together these bi-weekly Grouphug events, typically about solar sustainability or how to live more sustainably in your everyday life. Today is all about a solar crash course. We actually do this one almost every month for new community members or new customers so that they can learn everything about solar. This is probably my favorite workshop to do because we actually get into the details of how solar panels work, which is my favorite thing. I'm going to share my screen, so I won't be able to see all of you guys. And then, oh my gosh, this is a look into my very, very chaotic desktop. Okay, Emma, can you see that? Excellent. All right, so welcome everybody to this solar energy crash course. I always like to ask this question in the beginning. How many people here already own a solar panel? And then how many of you guys are just interested in learning more about solar? And you can go ahead and write that in the chat. It'll help me just get a sense of where everybody's at. Does anybody here already own solar? Like, do you have solar on your rooftop? Do you own a solar charger? Or are you like interested in learning how to do more? Interesting. Okay, so it looks like a mix. Some people have, some people don't. Oh, physical computing projects. That sounds very cool. A lot of people just want to learn how to get started. Great. All right. So before I get started, I want to do a quick plug for our next event in 2 weeks, just so that you guys know what's coming up. For Women's Month, we are having an event and partnering with Arcadia Power, which some of you guys might know. They're known as an ESCO, which I'm going to talk about a little later. But we're teaming up with Kate from Arcadia, who's the COO. Me and her are going to be talking about what it's like to work in solar with some predominantly male field, but that's been rapidly changing, how we got interested in solar and how diversity is changing within the field. So if you are interested in that, it's going to be very much about careers and how to break into the solar industry. It's going to be in 2 weeks, same time, Thursday at 7 p.m. Everybody who RSVP'd will get a link if you want to RSVP to that one. It's going to be really interesting. I've actually never met Kate before, so it's really going to be a fresh conversation about how she got started. I'm going to talk about how I got started. So if you're interested in you know, I don't even want to say women's career, because just any career in solar, but particularly if you are female and interested in entrepreneurship, it'll be a really great chat. And we're going to do a Q&A too, so you can ask us anything. All right, so moving on to the actual meat of the presentation, we're going to talk about a couple things. An intro, so what is Grouphug? What do we do? We're going to kind of go back to 6th, 7th grade science and talk about what actually is electricity. We'll talk about solar basics, and then we'll have a discussion about what can you actually do to go solar. So I'm going to fly through this because I already introduced myself, but some background. I'm Krystal. I'm an industrial designer by training, so I design products. Emma is actually an industrial design student at Drexel. I have taught design at a college level at the School of Visual Arts in New Jersey and in Parsons. I used to be a toy designer, actually, which you guys will hear more about. And I've had some residencies at different museums and companies. So a little bit about us. At Grouphug, we like to say that we make ridiculously good-looking solar panels that are easy to use because renewable energy shouldn't be that complicated. One of the more popular solar panels that I've created is a cat-shaped solar panel, Solar Cat. She lives at the New York Hall of Science in Queens, and this was actually one of the first projects I ever made with solar. And what Solar Cat actually does is it's a 140-watt solar panel that charges an installation in the museum, where you can charge your phones and kids can interact with these lights and sounds. Like I mentioned, I actually used to be a toy designer. So I didn't study energy. I haven't been in the energy industry for a long time, but a lot of people always ask me, okay, how did you go from designing toys? So I'm also a huge Star Wars nerd, and I got to work on a build your own R2D2 robot at my last company, which was basically the coolest toy I could ever make. And a lot of people ask me, okay, how did you go from R2D2 to solar panels? Like, why would you do that? And the answer is because I, like I'm sure many of you, was very frustrated by how hard it seemed to break into sustainability, especially when it came to solar. I got to a point where this is about 2.5 years ago. I sort of woke up one day and was like, I want to get solar panels. Like, I want to live more sustainably. And I know that energy has a big impact. How can I go solar? But I live in New York City. I don't own a house and I do not have access to my rooftop. I live in an apartment building. And it was a really defeating experience for me because I was so passionate about going solar and I couldn't figure out how to do it. And I know there's personal solar panels on the market for camping and hiking and fishing, but that's really not the kind of lifestyle or things that I like to do. And those products weren't speaking to me. And I was looking for a solar panel that was beautiful, blended in with my home decor that I could use every single day. So that's how Grouphug was really born. Some background history for you guys. This is a picture of the first commercial solar panel ever made in New Jersey in the 50s. And when I was doing my research and I found this, I kind of laughed because I was like, wow, if this picture were in color, it would look like today. It just looks like a rectangular solar panel slapped on a pole, same thing slapped on a roof, same thing slapped on a field. And as a designer, it really frustrated me that things hadn't changed. And that's why at Grouphug, we really believe that energy needs more creativity and not just utility. So here's some quick photos of prototypes of, before Grouphug had an official product, what did they look like? I love working with my hands, so I know we got some questions about how to make something DIY. We can definitely talk about that. And then finally, we launched our product last year on Kickstarter, a window solar charger that you can hang in any sunny window. We like to say it's a great first step into solar if you're not sure what to do, if you don't live in a house yet, and you just want to do something hands-on to understand and test how solar works. There's a built-in battery and USB port so that you literally installation, you just hang it up, and then you can charge your devices day or night. So I'm going to skip through this a little bit. We have a lot of, we've got thousands of customers all around the world. I love getting pictures of how they're using it. I think I always get cat pictures for some reason, lots of cats sitting at the window with their solar panel. You might have heard of us because we were on Shark Tank last year and we got an investment from Mark Cuban to keep growing the company. This talk is not about Shark Tank, but maybe we'll do one in the near future. All right. I'm going to show this at the end too. We always offer a special discount for people who come to workshops. So if you're interested in buying a product, if you use the code workshop10, you'll get $10 off at grouphugsolar.com. Don't worry about screenshotting and writing it down. We'll also email this to you if you RSVP'd. Okay. And a quick plug for this, we recently made a new educational book. So even if you're not interested in an actual product or charger, we made this picture book with actually most of the information you're going to see today. So if you're just interested in learning and you're not ready yet, this is an option for you. All right. So again, if you've got any questions at any time, please feel free to drop them in the chat. Now we're going to get right into it. So where does electricity actually come from? I think if the first picture you saw in your mind was probably the holes in the wall, right? That's where it comes from. It comes from the outlet. But how does it actually get there? And we're going to take this detour backstory about electricity because it's really important to understanding how solar fits into the bigger picture of the grid. So the way the modern grid is set up really goes down to the battle of the currents, or AC versus DC, in the 1880s. And the battle of the currents was mostly a feud and competition between these two men. So if you guys want to guess in the chat, do you recognize these two men? Who are they? You can write it in the chat. Emma knows. We've got Tesla and Edison. Nikola Tesla. Any other guesses before I keep going? Tesla, Edison, yes. Okay, you guys are right. One of these men actually, quote unquote, won the battle of the current. So one of these men invented the technology that actually is what the grid is based on today. If you were to guess, who do you think won, Tesla or Edison? And you can just guess. We've got one for Tesla, we've got Edison, a couple Edisons. Emma, you can't guess because you know the answer. But a couple Edisons, okay. Any other votes for Tesla? Okay, I got another Tesla privately. Anyone else? So I think, Emma, if we counted it up, is it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Edison, 1 Tesla? Is that right?
There are definitely more Edisons. Maybe 2 Teslas because you got that one in your private
yes.
chat.
Okay. Well, the answer is actually Tesla. It's funny because this always happens. Everybody always guesses Edison. And I think, he founded General Electric. He invented the light bulb, and maybe his inventions are maybe more of a household name, but Tesla actually won the battle of the currents. I should say he didn't do it alone. He did it with a man named George Westinghouse, which, if anyone is really into trains or railroads, like train nerds, he is a big railroad magnate who helped build out the rail infrastructure in the country. So I'm really boiling this down to the basics, but he and Tesla partnered up to invent their technology that I'm going to talk about, and build the foundation for the modern grid. So actually, let me go back. In this, I know I talked about AC and DC. Tesla invented AC, alternating current, and Edison was a proponent for DC, direct current. What do those words actually mean? I know it's one of those things where you've heard AC and DC probably 1,000 times in your life, probably more, but do you actually understand what those terms mean? So this is I tend to illustrate this with my body, so bear with me. A really easy way to think about AC and DC, there are 2 different types of electricity. Think about AC. So think AC Tesla, DC Edison. AC Tesla is basically really high voltage current that oscillates between positive and negative. So if you see me, I'm like waving my arm. So imagine a really high power current going from positive to negative, making this wiggly line. And it can go, because it's so high power, it can go farther distances. Imagine DC current as being a lower power type of current electricity, where it actually only flows in one direction. So it's a straight line. It's not going up and down like positive and negative. If you guys have seen sine waves in class, you see how it creates that positive negative flow. But because it's a lower voltage, it can only travel a shorter distance. So because of this, why do you guys think that Tesla or AC current won versus DC? Does anyone want to take a guess? We got one guess, cities. It could go further, and it's more stable. Yeah, you're all technically right. I think Carissa really hit it on the head where you can go further. And because of that, typically, depending on where you live, you don't have a lot of big power plants like right in the middle of cities. It's usually outside of it, or like a couple 100,000 miles outside of it, near a body of water or somewhere more remote. And that's because you can generate a ton of electricity at this power plant and then transport it and transform it down to where you need it to go. A fun fact, if anyone is interested, one of the first DC direct current power plants was called Pearl Street Station, and it was in downtown Manhattan, but it could only generate enough electricity to power that one block. Whereas there are power plants that obviously power all of New York City in different locations. So it wasn't as scalable at the time. And there's a lot of really interesting books and movies about the Tesla versus Edison battle. And, you know, I will say unbiased that I'm more of a Tesla person. I think if you're in engineering or design, it's a very big battle where people like to say that Edison was kind of a brilliant marketer, but maybe not as brilliant of an inventor as Tesla. So it's highly debated in certain circles. Okay, now that you guys know the basics of AC versus DC, we're going to talk about some more facts about solar. So this is another guessing game for you guys. What percentage of energy generated in the United States do you think is from renewables? So that would include solar, wind, geothermal, things like that. Got different ones, C, B. I see a lot of B's. I see a couple C's. No one's guessing A. I think that was too optimistic. Okay. I feel like it might be mostly B's. Maybe it's tied between B and C at this point.
That's what it looks like, yeah.
It is C. 17%. So that, I'm going to show you guys a chart later, but that includes all of renewables, so not just solar. And then what percentage of the total energy produced do you guys think is just solar energy? I see a D, B, cool. A little all over the board here. I see some C's. Some D's. It's D, which is very sad. It's very, very sad. There's so much potential. It's insane. And if anyone's interested in learning more about the actual numbers, EIA.gov is always the place that I go. I'm actually, the 2% number is from, this says 2018, is from 2019 that I have. And I'm still looking for an updated number for 2020. But my guess would be, it would be, you know, but between 2 and 3, but I think 2021 will be a big year. It'll be exciting to see how high it goes. Okay, so how do power plants actually generate electricity? And typically it can be described in one word. So if anyone has ever taken a field trip to a power plant or knows anyone that works at a power plant, how do you guys think power plants actually generate electricity? And it's true of typically of most of the typical power plants, whether it's nuclear or coal or gas. Ooh, we've got a lot of good guesses. Turbine, steam, magnetism, turning a turbine. Awesome. Spinning. So turbines, anyone who said turbines is right. Steam is technically right too. Spinning. And I always like to break this down for you guys. So if you're interested in learning more about this, I would Google and watch YouTube videos about generators and dynamos. It's basically a coiled copper wire with magnets. And if you want to get really technical, you're not really creating electricity, but you're causing electrons to move. And then depending on how you wire it, you're capturing that electricity. This is actually a really fun, this is a device that a friend and I made a couple of years ago. It's a little dynamo charger. It would take you years to charge your phone, by the way, so it's not very effective. But if you guys see, so I'm going to shake this, and you can kind of see this light turning on. That's basically what's happening. Inside, there's a little dynamo with a weight on it. So it's like a shake weight, and that is actually generating electricity to charge a battery. I always like stepping this down for everybody so you can get a sense of how it actually works. Part of why I love doing this workshop is taking these concepts and making it really easy to understand. So let's say you have a power plant. You are basically burning coal, burning natural gas, doing nuclear fission, burning biomass, whatever it may be. That heat then heats big vats of water to generate steam. So anyone that said steam, you're also right. That steam spins a turbine. So imagine this stuff vertically. That steam spins a turbine to generate power. So like what I was just showing you, that copper coil and magnet spin, electrons move. Then that you get to send that power on the grid. That power reaches your home, so it gets transformed down. and then you can charge anything you want. I always love talking about this because it's one of those things that you probably use every day but never really thought about. I'm sure everybody has these little white guys. If you're an Apple fan, whatever color you've got, does anyone know why these are called an AC to DC adapter? So now think about AC to DC. If we know that Tesla was the winner of the Battle of the Currents, and he was the proponent for AC, we know that the grid works on AC. So the electricity coming out of your socket is AC. Any type of mobile device that typically works on a battery, so a phone, I actually don't have my phone on me, a phone, a computer, think about things that you can move around and they don't have to be plugged. Batteries are typically DC devices. So my computer and my phone are DC devices. So you actually need this little adapter to go from the AC in the wall to convert it to the DC that your device needs to operate. Without this, you would probably fry your computer or phone. This is also, USB ports have a special protocol too to make sure everything is super safe. If anyone, I'm trying to think, I don't have my computer charger on me, but let's see if I can grab this in an elegant way. Right? This white box, or, I think for PCs, they typically are like black and longer. This guy is also an AC adapter. So it takes that electricity, AC electricity coming from the grid and converts it to DC so it can talk and work with your computer. I'm kind of giving you guys these building blocks so that this is all going to make sense when we talk about solar. But, it's one of those things where you've probably read AC adapter a million times. Now you actually know what that does. All right. Now you know all of the basics of how electricity works, how power plants work, the difference between AC and DC, the fathers of electricity, Tesla, Edison, and Westinghouse. Now we're going to get into the solar. So if you closed your eyes and pictured solar panels, you'd probably imagine something like this, a beautiful house with solar panels on the roof. One fun fact is that solar is one of the only forms of electricity that requires 0 moving parts. So when we talked about those power plants, obviously there's huge turbines and steam and mechanisms happening, combustion happening to generate that power. With solar panels, it's not like that. They literally, it's more of a chemical process, which we'll talk about. So we talked about this. I love reading this because I think it's really interesting to see these old ads. So this is the original ad from the 50s for solar panels, and it says, "Something new under the sun. It's the Bell Solar Battery, made of thin discs of specially treated silicon, an ingredient of common sand. It converts the sun's rays directly into usable amounts of electricity. Simple and trouble-free." I actually think this is a better solar ad than a lot of them that I see today. It's like the copy is really good. All right, so the science behind solar. Quick vocabulary, just because I'm gonna talk pretty quickly. There are a lot of different pieces in solar panels that we're gonna talk about. You have a solar cell, which is the basic building block that makes a solar panel. And then multiple solar panels make a solar array. So if you're ever driving and you see tons of solar panels in a field or on a house, that's a solar array. So a solar array is made up of solar panels. A solar panel is made up of solar cells. It's an easy way to think about it. A solar cell is made of silicon, not silicone, silicon. And a lot of people always ask like Silicon Valley. And yes, that's right. Computer chips and things that were booming when Silicon Valley was formed are also made of silicon. And one of the main reasons why the highest efficiency solar cells are made of silicon and why, computer chips are made of silicon is because it's a very smooth, pure process that allows you to pass electrons with very little impurities so that you don't lose a lot of efficiency. And so these are very thin. I've got a lot of solar cells here which usually when we do this workshop in person, I would pass these out to you so you could actually hold them. But just so you guys can see, here are some solar cells right here. They're very thin, so they almost disappeared, if you can see them. But what's happening in each of these layers is illustrated here, where there's the very basics that you guys should know is, in order for electrons to flow, you need them to move between positive and negative poles. I think if you remember that from science class. So what's basically happening here is there are multiple layers of silicon. One layer is charged positively and one layer is charged negatively. And what's happening is when sunlight hits those layers, it creates a flow for those electrons to get harvested. So there's really no moving parts. It's all layers of differently charged silicon that's happening. And if you think about, I don't know if I have this slide. No. If you think about, the very basics of a potato battery, if anyone remembers making that, where you put two nails, usually it's actually a penny in a nail so that you have a positive and negative charge, and you put an LED between them. And if your potato is acidic enough, that LED will light up. It's, I'm not going to say it's the same thing, but it's a similar principle where you have positive and negative layers of silicon. The sunlight hits them and it causes those electrons to move. And if you look in here, for anyone who wants to get more technical, you'll see there's this, what's called a depletion layer. And that's basically where, things get wired together, where you can route the electricity in a certain way. And I'm going to talk more about that. And feel free, if anyone has questions, please drop them in the chat too. 1 second, I just realized. There we go. Okay. What are solar panels made of? So we just talked about this, but I think this illustration is a little more clear. So you can see that they're made of these silicon cells. When sunlight hits the cell, energy knocks off electrons free of their atoms, allowing them to move through those materials in between those poles. There are different types of solar cells. So this is actually a close-up of this polycrystalline cell. I don't know if you guys can really see that on the camera. You can kind of see those shards on those solar cells. So polycrystalline cells are honestly, at this point, a little old school. When I started researching them 2 years ago, they were more popular. Polycrystalline means many silicon crystals. So you can actually see where they're fused together. Polycrystalline tends to be a little more affordable. They tend to be this bright blue color, which is because of an anti-reflective spray that they get, because darker tones and darker colors absorb more sunlight and reflect less light, which makes them more effective.
So there's a question in the chat from Sarah. Do solar panels hold the electricity or do they transfer it?
Oh, that's a good question. They do not hold the electricity. Without a battery, you can't really hold electricity, actually. It has to get used immediately. So really any electric device without a battery doesn't hold electricity. You can kind of think of electricity like water, and it just passes through. And unless you have somewhere where the water can go, it doesn't store it. So if you had for example, if you had a solar panel, but it wasn't connected to a device that was going to use the electricity right away, and it wasn't connected to a battery, then the electricity basically passes through it and it's gone. Hopefully that answered your question. Oh, I saw someone say it was beautiful. I think solar cells really are beautiful when you look at them. It was one of a big inspiration for me to keep going with Grouphug, because I was like, wow, these materials are gorgeous. More people should make stuff with them. Usually I would do this in person, but just so you guys can see, I'm in this picture, I'm using a multimeter to basically quickly show you that the solar cells do generate electricity all by themselves. So I literally took one of these cells. These are a different shape, and I have, the positive and negative sides of this multimeter, which is used to read voltage and current off of electric devices. And it's already, that little piece is generating 0.18 volts. And it's not connected to anything. There's no circuit board, nothing, just like that. quick math for anyone who wants to get deeper into solar. I know someone talked about doing their own backyard experiments. The formula that you really need to know is power equals current times voltage. And this is also known as Ohm's law. So power, watts, I think people are used to seeing watts. So light bulbs, computers sometimes will have wattages on them. Our solar charger is 10 watts, means that the current and voltage are multiplied. Current is typically like the strength of electricity going through, and voltage is kind of the how much is going through. I feel like I'm going to save that maybe for a different electronics 101 class, because we could talk about that forever. But for example, we have a 10-watt solar panel that is about 6.8 volts and like 1.2 amps. So if you multiply those together, that's how you get the 10. Monocrystalline solar cells are probably the most popular right now. They tend to be really matte blue, so they're made out of a single silicon crystal. So you can tell the difference between this one, it's like blue and velvety, and it doesn't have those little like jaggedy shards on them. This in particular is a SunPower solar cell. I'm a big fan of SunPower. We use them in our product. They're the highest efficiency cells on the market. They don't sponsor us or anything. They just are actually the best. They're actually the best cells. And you can see here just some differences of how those look. Okay, so now that you've seen, sorry, my little light is running out of battery. So ironically, so if I look darker, I'm gonna get a little closer to the screen. So how do these little solar cells actually become something useful? Now you've seen all the pieces. So if you look closely at this picture, this is a solar array. Now hopefully you recognize here are all these monocrystalline solar squares all lined up together. And if you look at, there's these lines going through them here. What that is actually this. So this is my unorganized nest of tinning. There's a metal tinning that basically you solder onto the cells to connect them together. And what happens when you connect them together is, depending on if you connect them in series or in parallel, you actually add voltage and amperage. And I think what's so exciting about that is, you know, if you're trying to go solar for your house, it's very modular and you can actually get the exact power that you need for your house, because it just depends on how you wire everything together. And this is a really quick demonstration just to show you guys with those little solar cells. But you can see before, when I was measuring one solar cell, it was 0.18 volts. What I did here was I stacked them on top of each other. I didn't solder them, but they're electrically connected in this picture, and it's 0.68. So really quickly, just by attaching them, you start adding your power. So if you wanted to, if you're here and you're a designer or an engineer and you're interested in doing DIY, if you wanted to create, you know, a 31.5 watt solar panel or a 6-watt solar panel or a 113 watt solar panel, it's totally possible, because it just depends on how many pieces you string together. And that's where, like, we use solar cells and we put them in different patterns. Like, we made a cat-shaped one because literally anything is possible. You just have to solder the shape that you want. Okay, so we talked about AC and DC. We talked about the basics of solar. Solar can be, and this might answer the other person's question about how can it be stored. Solar can either be sent on the grid, which basically means in that picture about how power plants work, we talked about how, you know, power plants generate them and then they send energy through the grid that's connected to your house. You can connect solar panels to your house in the same way. Do you guys think solar panels make AC or DC energy? What do you think? If you had to guess, AC or DC? We've got an AC, we've got a couple DCs, couple ACs. Couple DCs. We might be edging up on DC. So anyone that said DC, you are correct. And a quick kind of way to know is that solar panels don't have any moving parts. So the electricity comes out in one polarity, one direction. It's positive. You get positive energy. When you actually think about the dynamics of something moving and something spinning between magnetic poles, it usually creates an alternating current because it's alternating between poles, which means it's going between positive and negative. If that makes sense. So if you think about any type of motor, and well, there are DC motors. I don't want to get too deep into electronics, but typically if you have something with moving parts that are spinning, it probably makes AC energy. If you have something like solar, it's not moving at all. It creates DC energy. So you can send it to the grid. The thing you will need though, which is actually funny, the grid is AC, right? And solar panels are DC. So you actually kind of need one of these for your solar panels. Obviously it doesn't look like this, but it's an inverter. So instead of converting, it actually does the opposite. So I'm gonna walk you through some like AC-DC inception. Let's say you have your house and you have DC solar panels on your house. Your grid is AC, so you actually need an inverter. So you have solar panels, then you would need an inverter to invert your DC energy to AC to connect to your house. That typically looks like, a part of the utility box or an extra box on your house that they would install. Very, very standard, no big deal at all. But then I always think what's funny is then you have DC on your roof, AC on the grid, and then you have one of these that goes back from AC to DC, which I just think is funny. You just keep converting electricity from AC to DC basically the whole time. If you want to be off the grid, then you can elect to do battery storage, which I'm sure people have heard in the news and seen. Like Tesla makes their own solar batteries. A lot of solar companies make solar batteries. There's a ton of different brands. There's SunVault by SunPower. There's Sonnen, which is a popular brand. What happens here is instead of the electricity going through the grid, the electricity from your solar panels go right into these batteries. And then, typically you still have an inverter here because all of the appliances in your house are designed for AC. So for example, your fridge and the lights attached to the grid are AC. So you can't go all DC yet, but like electric cars are DC. So I believe, so you could plug them straight into your battery. Any questions on this? I feel like this part gets a little confusing. The one thing I'll say, and this comes up a lot, is if you have solar panels and you're connected to the grid, if there is a power outage, you will not have power. And that can be a little confusing to understand, but it's because the electricity from your solar is going into the grid and into your house. But if there's a grid issue, and you don't have storage, it would be like a regular power outage. So I think that's an important thing to consider. And that's why batteries have been in the news so much, because people are interested in being off the grid and having more energy independence. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to keep going so that we leave lots of time for questions. I always like to end with these pictures because I think they're inspiring to see what's coming in the future. So there are big solar arrays in different shapes right now. This is a solar panda, a solar panda in China. This is actually a solar Mickey Mouse that's in Florida, right outside of Disney World. There's a solar bikini, solar necklaces. Target is surprisingly very progressive when it comes to solar, and a lot of their warehouses and stores have solar arrays on the top. You just can't see them. And then there's a lot of innovations happening with solar being integrated into clothing. So this is a Tommy Hilfiger project. I don't know if it ever went commercial, but them experimenting with solar panels on jackets, solar panel flowers, solar panel bricks. I always add this picture of these people with these solar hats just because they're ridiculous. Solar hats. And I'll end on this, which is, so with all of this information, what can you actually do to go solar? And we typically do this actually in a separate workshop, just because I've already been talking for half an hour, and talking through all of these is a lot of information. But I'll leave you guys with this and I'll send you more information. We've done a ton of research in helping people go solar, and we've boiled it down to basically 5 ways anyone can go solar. There's residential, which is typical rooftop solar. There's commercial solar. So if you own property or if you own a business, you know, you can do ground mounted or solar for your business. You can actually save a ton of money that way. There's community solar, where you can sign up for a local solar farm. If you're like me, you live in an apartment, you don't have access to your roof, but you want to do something, you can sign up to a community solar farm. And basically what happens is you will get a discount on your electricity bill, and you don't have to own any solar panels at all because you're basically supporting it. There's personal solar, which is solar products. So DIY solar chargers like our products. I'm pointing here because I actually am sitting at my desk and I always have a solar charger right next to me. And then there's also energy service providers, also known as ESCOs. Have you guys heard of Green Mountain Energy? They're probably the most popular ESCO. And we've actually done whole webinars about just ESCOs where we interview people. So I'll send this to you guys in a link, but an ESCO is basically like a middleman, and they buy and sell what are called renewable energy credits. And they're kind of like the carbon offsets of the energy world, where you're not actually getting the solar energy, but you're supporting it in the marketplace. So that's also an option. That one typically costs more money, but if that's your only option, I think it's a great one. Okay, so if anyone wants to follow along, we do post daily solar content at grouphugsolar.com. Grouphug Solar on Instagram, we're grouphugtech.com. I'm going to stop sharing and take a breath with my tea. And Emma, I see some questions.
Well, let's start with an easy one because you just talked about community